Somebody sound the laptop gaming klaxon, because today we're in for a treat, guys. This is the 2021 Razer Blade Advanced Edition, coming armed with Nvidia's latest 3000 series graphics chips. Now, we all know modern day laptops won't beat out the equivalent current generation desktop PC, but can a current gen laptop beat out a desktop PC built only 12 months ago? We're going to take a look at this model in a bit more detail, and we're going to have a look at those benchmark stats a little bit later on. And I promise you, it's really, really close. But before we get into that, guys, I'd appreciate it if you end up enjoying this video. Remember to go and give that like button a little tickle, hit the subscribe button while you're at it. And I'd really love to engage with you all a little bit more. So please head on over to my social channels. It's at PYITV on both Instagram and Twitter. I'd really like to hear from you guys about the kind of content you'd like to see me coming up with next over the course of the coming weeks, months, hopefully years as well. So with all that said, let's get to it. The design of the 2021 Razer Blade hasn't particularly changed compared with 2020. We've still got that super sleek angular finish all around. That anodized black finish makes it look super cool, albeit it is going to send you on a one-way trip to Fingerprint Central. I'd say it looks ultra stealthy, but that would be to confuse this thing with the Razer Stealth, which is a separate sort of Ultrabook model. We'll call it Ultra Ninja. I love a laptop where I can rock up to a coffee shop, or I can go to a board meeting at work and not have to explain or feel awkward about the RGB vomit that I've spewed everywhere. But don't panic, this is a gaming laptop after all, so we do have some RGB, albeit significantly more subtle than you might get on some other devices. So you have the traditional back of the display Razer icon, which in Razer Synapse software, you can set that to an on, off, or strobing sort of state. And then we also have the backlit keyboard as well, which right now is set to kind of a strobing mode. But again, in Razer's Chroma software, you can pretty much customize that to whatever your heart really desires. Now, for a gaming laptop, the Razer Blade is actually impressively light. So it weighs about 2 kilos, about 4.4 pounds, which for context puts it squarely in the territory of the all-purpose kind of market-leading Windows 10 device in the XPS 15. And despite that thinness, Razer haven't skimped on port options either. So on the left side of the device, we have Razer's own charging ports. We've got a little bit more on that later. We've got 2 USB Type A Gen 3.2 ports, so there's no chance you're going to be living dongle life. We've got a USB-C port, and I should note the one on this side is not Thunderbolt compatible, and we have the obligatory headphone jack as well. Moving on to the right side of the device, we have ourselves a Kensington lock, a full-size HDMI port if you want to link this thing up to another monitor, yet another USB Type A port, and this time we do have ourselves a USB-C Thunderbolt 3 capable port. Note Thunderbolt 3, not Thunderbolt 4, which is the current standard. You're not really missing out on a lot. And the pièce de résistance is the full size, and I mean full size SD card reader. The trackpad on the Razer Blade is massive, and it's every bit as good as some of its other Windows competitors like the Microsoft Surface devices, the Dell XPS 13, Dell XPS 15. The keyboard does let itself down a bit. From a gaming perspective, it actuates really quickly, really fast. You'll have no complaints there. But in terms of a prolonged, ongoing typing experience, I never really found myself getting up to speed with the Razer Blade. All around just a little bit disappointing, but I'd say gaming is your primary use case. You'll have no problem with it whatsoever. The bezels on the side and the top are super thin, albeit we've still got quite a bit of chunk at the bottom side of the laptop. Kind of left feeling, wishing that Razer had put a 16:10 aspect ratio in, because that would have just given us another tick in the box from a productivity perspective. We are going to see a 16:10 aspect ratio in the new Lenovo Legion 5 Pro, so get subscribed so you don't miss my review when that thing comes to this table. We've got a nice pair of speakers either side of the keyboard deck. The sound quality is reasonably crisp and clear, albeit, in my opinion, lacking any kind of depth in bass and treble. Let's take a quick listen. Now, the Razer Blade has a handy feature which aids battery life management, which is to say that when you're doing low intensity work, it will default to the integrated Intel graphics, and then when you go into gaming mode or you do high-powered activity, it should be automatically switching to the discrete graphics card, so you can maximize that 240 Hz refresh rate. Truth be told, I found the entire system horribly unreliable. I tried different combinations, using the Optimus automated switching, going into the Windows graphics settings and setting my exe files for the game so they would automatically use high performance mode. Sometimes it would work, and then sometimes it would simply stop working. In the end, I just resigned myself to going into the Nvidia control panel, setting it so it would always use the discrete graphics card when I was playing games, and then when all was said and done, resetting it back to using the automated switching and letting it do its thing, whatever its thing really is. Now with this thing plugged into the wall and the Synapse settings in Razer software cranked up to the max for both the CPU and the GPU, I mean, come on, it's a gaming laptop. This thing makes an incredible amount of noise. So a pair of headphones is definitely going to be the order of the day when you're gaming. That being said, if you dial the settings down or you unplug it and you use it in battery mode, the thing is really silent and runs surprisingly cool. On the topic of temperatures, even when the settings are dialed up to maximum, using this thing on my lap, it wasn't the most uncomfortable laptop I've ever used. I mean, it's far from cool, it definitely gets warm, but the presence of these massive pair of exhaust fans on the bottom side of the laptop mean that the air is actually expelled away from the laptop rather than other laptops, particularly in the thin and light space, which effectively end up using the aluminium chassis on the bottom side of the laptop as a massive heatsink, which is what eventually kind of gives off that painful sensation. I didn't experience that with the Razer Blade, which is really, really pleasing for those of you who are going to be using this in a more casual, on the couch watching TV kind of mode of operation. For all that pleasantness, you're not going to be able to get through a single day at a hypothetical future office or going to a coffee shop on a single charge. Best case scenario, I got 5 hours of battery life out of this doing reasonably low intensity work on a remote Citrix virtual desktop. You're also not going to have a great time lugging around this thing. It's the gargantuan 230 watt power adapter that Razer include, and frankly, well, this thing needs it based on the battery drain that it goes through. The charger has a nice robust braided cable, but the rigidity of the thing is so strong that it basically makes cable management all but impossible. That being said, both the USB-C ports are capable of charging the device using a 20 volt power adapter up to 100 watts of throughput. It will feel like a bit of a trickle charge, but it will certainly get you through your day wherever you may be working remotely rather than having to lug that massive thing around. Now, unlike some gaming laptops, and we're looking at you, Asus G14, Razer still include a webcam in the top bezel of the laptop. But make no mistake, it's still a 720p webcam and it's still I'll say it time and time again, if smartphone manufacturers can manage to squeeze into a tiny frame a 4K 30 FPS front-facing camera, then laptop manufacturers can at the very least do us the courtesy, particularly in this post-pandemic world, of including at least a rudimentary 1080p webcam rather than a 720p one. Now, between the base Razer Blade and the advanced Razer Blade models, there's a huge array of different kind of specs and configuration options you can put together. This version I've got here has got Intel's 10th generation 10875H processor, which is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU. It's got 16 gigabytes of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage. We get ourselves a 15-inch display. This one is a Quad HD display with a massive 240 Hz refresh rate. It'll get you 100% of the sRGB color gamut, so great for creative professionals, but it has an absolutely pitiful 276 nits of peak brightness. So Razer are quite clearly assuming that anybody buying this is doing most of their work and most of their gaming in a literal cave. The SSD that's included is reasonably quick in terms of read and write speeds, not the best I've seen, far from the worst though, so you'll be completely satisfied there. There is expansion room for both storage up to 4 terabytes and for the RAM up to 64 gigabytes as well. And for all that, it will cost you a cool, eye-watering £2,300. But for that, you're going to get performance, as we're about to see, nearly on par with only a 12-month-old desktop gaming workstation. So let's get into all that, shall we? Let's start with more practical, general purpose benchmarks and look at Cinebench R23. This is an area where we see probably the oddest result of the whole lot that we're going to see today. The AMD CPU unsurprisingly does really well in multi-threaded workloads, but when we look at single-threaded workloads, and I've included a Intel 11th Gen Ultrabook in the form of the Dell XPS 13 for comparison, we can see that that actually outperforms the Razer Blade in single-core performance despite the significantly better cooling that the Razer Blade comes equipped with. And it's a virtually identical identical story in the Geekbench CPU benchmark test, with the AMD once again winning out in multi-core, multi-threaded tests, and the 11th gen Intel CPU in the thin and light Dell XPS 13, outperforming the 10th generation Intel chip in this Razer Blade. In a flavour of what we're about to see in the gaming benchmarks, the 3070 in the Blade pips the 2070 Super in the desktop PC by a small margin in OpenCL tests, but doesn't quite manage to maintain that trend when we move over to Vulkan. And we've mentioned that the Razer Blade could very easily be used for productivity work. Looking at the Premiere Pro Puget benchmark, it got a pretty respectable score of 597. I actually did use this for some day-to-day editing, had absolutely no problem at all scrubbing through 4K 30 and 4K 60 frames footage. Now for the good stuff, let's get into the gaming benchmarks. Now I've ditched the Dell XPS 13 because its Intel Iris Xe graphics just simply don't compete. I'm going to do a selection of tests because this is a 1440p display, but there's a lot of you out there that may be interested in downing things to 1080 so you can make the most of the 240 Hz refresh rate on this thing. So let's get under the skin of it. Let's start with the 1440p tests. In Overwatch, which represents our mainstream esports title, the Razer Blade was only 8% behind the desktop GPU in the 2070 Super. In Cyberpunk though, with ultra settings enabled but ray tracing disabled, the desktop had a reasonably solid 12% lead, but with ray tracing enabled, that advantage all but evaporated, with the desktop maintaining a moderate lead over the laptop, but well within the margin of error. Using the Deus Ex Mankind Divided benchmark, we had a margin of difference between the two that was well within the margin of error before seeing that gap widen significantly again on The Witcher 3, where the desktop PC seems to particularly enjoy that game with a 17% lead. In the 1080p test, which we'll cycle through quickly here, we have a pretty consistent trend, which is the Blade seems to match the desktop 2070 Super in basically every game in terms of minimums, maximums, and averages, with the only outlier once again being The Witcher 3, which the desktop PC just seems to really enjoy with a massive 25% lead over the Razer Blade at 1080p. So is a current gen laptop better than a last generation gaming PC? Well, it's close, but not quite. Would I buy the Razer Blade 15? Absolutely, but I definitely wouldn't buy this model. Looking back at the benchmarks we ran earlier, Overwatch at 1080p, our esports title, which should get the highest theoretical frames, running at the maximum settings, didn't get anywhere near the 240 Hz refresh rate, kind of coming in around 175 maximum. Instead, I'd look at the £2,050 Razer Blade base model, which will still get you a Quad HD panel, albeit one with 165 Hz refresh rate, a refresh rate you're far more likely to maximize. But that model will also include half the space in terms of storage and a moderately slower CPU, which I don't really expect to impact things too much from a gaming perspective. There are also non-Quad HD regular 1080p HD options if you want to save yourself a little bit more money as well. But at a 15-inch laptop, Quad HD really is the sweet spot. It dramatically improves the gaming experience on AAA titles. And if you are in the mood for using your Razer Blade laptop for productivity work as well, you'll really appreciate all those extra pixels, even if it's still only a 16:9 rather than a 16:10 aspect ratio. In a few weeks' time, I'll be reviewing the Alienware M15R4, so get subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed today's video, give the like button a tickle, and I will of course see you in the next one.